Montana Territory, July 1881, the girl came tearing out of the tree line, barefoot and bleeding, with smoke rising behind her and a rifle shot echoing in the hills. She stumbled into the clearing like a ghost spit out from hell, her long brown dress torn and hands scraped raw from the rocks. Her breath came fast and ragged, eyes wild with panic as she looked around for anyone. That was when she saw him. He was on horseback, tall in the saddle, dark-haired under his hat, a rifle balanced across his lap. The horse shifted beneath him, but the man stayed calm, watching her like he had been waiting. "Help me," she gasped, her voice cracking. "Why help me?" The cowboy looked right into her eyes and said softly, "Because I want to." He dismounted in one smooth motion and tossed the reins around a tree branch. Then he walked toward her like there was all the time in the world, even though her face was full of blood and her knees shook like they might give out. Her name was Clara Ellison. She was 21 and had been living on the edge of Deer Lodge with her father and two younger siblings until 3 days ago when the barn was set on fire and her world went black. "They took my brother and sister," she said, her voice shaking as he knelt beside her. "Lila and Levy. They're just kids." The cowboy's jaw tightened. "How old?" "Lila is 10, Levy's 8. He looked toward the smoke line curling up behind the ridge. "You know who did it?" "Jacob Rudd," she said, barely above a whisper. "He was my father's ranch hand, got fired last winter. He said we'd regret it." He stood and reached out a hand. "Come on," she hesitated. "What's your name?" "Malcolm Ashford." She took his hand. He led her to his horse and helped her up first, then swung up behind her. As they rode, Clara held on to the saddle horn, afraid to lean back but grateful for the warmth at her back. Her body ached, but it was nothing compared to the fear in her gut. They rode hard until dusk, across dry hills and through thick pine. When the sun dropped low, Malcolm led them off the trail to a low hollow near a creek. He helped her down and she winced as her feet hit the ground. "You need rest," he said. "I need to find my siblings." "You will. But not with your legs bleeding and your lungs half burnt." He dug into his saddlebags and pulled out a canteen, a roll of bandages, and a small tin of salve. Clara sat on a flat stone, watching him kneel in front of her and start cleaning her scrapes. His touch was careful, like he had done this before. "You a doctor?" she asked. "No, just been hurt enough to know how to patch things up." "Why are you helping me?" she asked again, quieter this time. He looked up from her ankle. "Because I want to." She blinked hard, trying not to cry. When night fell, he started a small fire. They ate beans and jerky in silence, the flames casting long shadows through the trees. Clara wrapped herself in the blanket he gave her and leaned back against a tree. Her lips parted, but she hesitated. "You always ride alone?" she asked. "Mostly." "Why?" He studied the fire. "Lost someone once, never figured out how to let anyone close after that." Clara's voice softened. "I'm sorry." He nodded once, then looked at her. "You were brave running like that. I was scared. You still ran." She looked down at her hands. "I did not know where else to go. You found the right place." They slept in shifts. Malcolm took first watch, sitting near the fire with his rifle across his lap. When it was Clara's turn, she sat beside him. He offered her coffee from his tin cup, and she took it with both hands, grateful for the warmth. "You think he'll hurt them?" she asked. "Not if we get there fast." She looked at him. "Why do you care what happens to us?" He turned his head. "Because no one did that for me when I needed it. I reckon I am done watching bad men take what they want." Clara looked at his profile, the hard lines of his jaw, the calm in his eyes. Something in her chest shifted. By dawn, they were back in the saddle. Malcolm led them west, toward Rudd's old cabin near the Bitterroot Range. Clara remembered it from when she was a child, long before Jacob had worked for them. The man had always been cruel, even when he smiled. They reached the ridge by late morning. Through the trees, Clara spotted smoke rising from a chimney, a mule tied to the post, and on the porch Lila. She was sitting on the steps, her face dirty, her dress torn. Malcolm paused behind a thicket, tying his horse low. He pulled his rifle and whispered, "Stay here. I am coming with you." He turned to her. "If you get hurt, they lose you too." She clenched her jaw but nodded. He moved like a shadow through the brush, low and careful. Clara could barely breathe as she watched from behind a fallen log. She heard a shout, then a shot. She jumped to her feet. But before she could take a single step, Malcolm came out of the trees, rifle in one hand, leading Lila and Levy with the other. The boy ran straight into Clara's arms, sobbing. Malcolm crouched beside them. "He is not going to hurt anyone again," he said. Clara looked up at him, her arms wrapped tight around both children. "You found them? I said I would." She stared at him, tears sliding down her cheeks. "Why did you come for me? You could have just kept riding." He brushed a leaf from Lila's tangled hair, then looked at Clara. "Because I wanted to." She stared at him, heart thudding. And then she did not care about the dirt on her face or the blood on her hands. She leaned forward and kissed him. He froze just a second, then kissed her back, his hand cupping the side of her face like she was something precious. They stood like that a long time, kids safe between them, the sun high, the cabin quiet, and the fear finally gone. They were not alone anymore. They stayed 3 nights in the cabin. The first was restless, with the children wedged tight between Clara and the wall, and Malcolm sleeping close to the door, his rifle within arm's reach. The second night was quieter, with the wind scraping branches across the roof and Lila asking Malcolm to tell a story before sleep. He didn't, but he did hum something low and steady while stoking the fire, and that seemed to be enough. On the third morning, Clara stepped out onto the porch and found Malcolm already saddling the horses. The sky was streaked pale orange, the air still cool. "Thought you might leave before we woke," she said, folding her arms against the chill. He didn't look over. "Thought about it." Clara stepped down one stair, then paused. "You always leave without saying goodbye. This ain't my cabin." She walked closer, her boots crunching dry pine needles. "Still, you could say something." He tightened a strap, then turned toward her. "You got anyone left to go to? There's a cousin in Helena. She runs a boarding house. She expecting you." "No, but she knew my mother might take us in." Malcolm nodded, gaze shifting toward the woods. "It's a long ride. You'll need supplies." "I can figure it out." He looked at her then, slow and searching. "You always say that like it's a shield." "Say what?" "That you'll figure it out, like it means you don't have to ask for help." Clara stepped back. "I'm not used to anyone offering it. Maybe it's time you were." Inside, Levy was awake and poking at the coals with a stick. Lila still slept, curled in a quilt someone must have left behind years ago. Clara packed what little they had: 2 tin plates, a half sack of flour, a cracked comb, and wrapped it in a feed sack. When she stepped outside again, Malcolm was mounting up. "I'll ride as far as Drummond with you," he said. "Then I'll head south." She narrowed her eyes. "You just said it's a long ride. You saying that for me or for the kids?" "Both." Levy tugged at her sleeve. "Can we ride with him?" Malcolm met her eyes, waiting. She nodded once. They rode single file, Clara with Lila in front and Levy with Malcolm. The trail opened wide after a mile, and they made good time along the creek, the horses grateful for the level ground. By noon, they reached a shallow bend where the cottonwoods grew thick and green, and Malcolm called a stop. He handed Levy down and stepped back, giving the boy a moment to find his feet. Then he looked at Clara. "You ever done this before? Start again from nothing?" She crouched near the water, rinsing her hands. "Not like this. Helena's got some rough corners. You sure she'll open her door?" "No." "But I'm not afraid of a locked one." He crouched opposite her. "You're not, are you?" She met his eyes. "Are you?" "I've had enough of locked doors. I'd rather knock than leave." She didn't answer. Instead, she tilted her face toward the trees, letting the wind move across her skin. Her sleeves were rolled, her arms freckled and strong. "You'll stay in Drummond tonight?" she asked. "Depends what the trail looks like. You said you were heading south." "There's someone I owe a visit to in the big hole, old friend." She glanced down at her hands. "You always keep your word," he nodded once. "Every time." They rode again in silence, the hills flattening as they neared the rail line. The town sat low and steady, a general store, a depot, 2 saloons, and a church with a crooked steeple. Clara hadn't been this close to town since the spring markets. They stopped at the livery, and Malcolm helped the children down. Clara stood with her hand on the saddle horn, watching him check the girths. "I can find the boarding car," she said. "They'll have a list of who's traveling west. I'll come with you." She hesitated, then gave a slight nod. The station master was a squat man with sweat stains under his arms, but he pointed them toward a woman in a bonnet near the platform. Clara walked ahead, shoulders back. Malcolm stayed near the children, letting her speak for herself. 20 minutes later, Clara returned, her face unreadable. "She'll take us," she said, voice low. Malcolm nodded. "Good, she's leaving at first light. Says there's room in the back wagon if we don't mind sleeping close." "You mind?" Clara looked toward the wagon, then back at him. No, he didn't speak until the children wandered out of earshot, chasing each other near the water trough. "You want me to stay till morning?" She didn't answer right away. Then, yes, they found a room above the store, 2 beds, 1 window. Clara let the children take the larger one and sat on the edge of the smaller, brushing dust from her skirt. Malcolm stood in the doorway. "I'll sleep on the floor," he said. She looked up. "You don't have to." He leaned against the frame. "I want to." She shook her head a little, almost smiling. "You keep saying that. I mean it every time." She watched him cross the room, kneel to unroll his blanket and lay it beside the wall. Her voice was quiet but steady. "You could come with us, you know." He didn't look over. "And do what?" "I don't know. Whatever's next." He stood slowly and turned to face her. "You'd want that. I don't say things I don't mean." Malcolm stepped closer. "You sure?" She rose to her feet. "I am." He reached for her hand. She let him take it. Neither of them spoke when he bent his head and kissed her, not quick, not urgent, but careful, like he was laying something down that might last. When they pulled apart, she didn't step back. "I don't know how to do this," she said. "We'll figure it out." She smiled then, small and certain. "Together? Because I want to." The wagon rolled out of Drummond before sunrise, wheels creaking under the weight of crates and bundles, the canvas top stained from years of weather. Clara sat toward the back with Lila tucked beside her and Levy asleep across her lap, his head heavy and warm. Malcolm rode just behind them, reins slack, his horse keeping easy pace. The trail north toward Helena was slow going, dust rising in long ribbons behind the wagons. The woman who'd offered them passage, Mrs. Hargrove, ran the train with quiet efficiency, marking rest breaks with a brass timepiece she checked often, her face lined from years of prairie sun. Clara didn't speak much that first day, only shifting now and then to check on the children or pass them a tin cup of water from the shared canteen. But when the wagon halted at midday near a dry stream bed, she stepped down, brushing her skirt free of dust, and walked toward Malcolm where he stood tying his horse to a mesquite. "I heard you speaking to Mrs. Hargrove," she said, stopping a few paces away. "She asked if I was hired on," he replied. "Said no." "Why didn't you?" He lifted one shoulder. "Didn't feel right to put a price on staying close." She glanced toward the wagon. "You plan on riding all the way to Helena?" "That depends on you." Clara studied him. "You always wait for someone else to decide your path." "Not always, just this once." She folded her arms. "And after Helena, depends where you're headed." She hesitated, then looked down at her boots. "My cousin's place, it's a room above her kitchen, nothing more." "I don't know what kind of work I could find there." "Doesn't have to be Helena," he said. Clara raised her eyes. "You offering something else?" "There's a man I know runs a station east of Townsend. Needs someone who can manage accounts and keep things in order. Said his wife passed 2 winters back. He's been looking for help." Her brows lifted. "And you think I should work for him?" "I think you could run the place better than he does, and it's near good grazing land." "I was planning to settle somewhere close to that stretch." She looked at him a long moment, then sat on a rock beneath a crooked pine. "You've thought this through?" "I've been thinking since I saw you run out of those trees." Her voice lowered. "You don't ever speak just to be kind, do you?" "I don't see the use in saying what I don't mean." She picked at the hem of her sleeve. "That station, is there a school nearby?" "About 5 miles. Wagon comes through twice a week for the children who can't walk it." She nodded slowly. "And water?" "Creek runs year-round, land's flat, good for planting." Clara looked toward the children who were now chasing each other in slow, wide circles around the wagon wheels. "They've had enough uncertainty to last them." "That's why I asked." She tilted her head. "You plan to stay then?" "I plan to build something worth staying for." The next 3 days passed in slow rhythm. Dust by day, firelight by night. At camp, Malcolm taught Levy how to tie a line knot while Clara stitched the seam of Lila's dress back together with a borrowed needle, and a length of blue thread unraveled from her own hem. By the fourth morning, the low peaks of the Elkhorns cut sharp against the sky. Helena sat beyond them, nestled into the folds of stone and pine. Mrs. Hargrove's wagon peeled off toward the west, and Clara, after a long pause, directed the children toward Malcolm's horse instead. They rode double, Malcolm holding Levy steady on the saddle while Clara kept Lila close on foot, her hand never leaving the girl's shoulder. By dusk, they reached the edge of the land he'd spoken of, a low, open stretch flanked by cottonwood and thistle, with a weathered fence leaning along its edge. An older man stepped out from the porch of a small station house, wiping his hands on a rag. He had a crooked gait and a wary look, but when Malcolm introduced Clara, he nodded once and opened the door without another word. Inside, the place smelled of tobacco and old flour. A stove stood in the corner and a ledger lay open on the table. Clara moved slowly through the space, taking in the shelves, the cracked window pane, the dust caught in the corner seams. "I could make this work," she said. "You won't be doing it alone," Malcolm said. She turned to face him. "You mean to stay here?" she said. "If you'll have me." Clara's eyes didn't waver. "I don't want someone to rescue me. I've had enough of being someone's burden." "I'm not here to rescue you," he said. "I'm here to stay beside you." She stepped forward. "And if I fall apart again, then I'll be there to help you build again." "Not because you need me, because I want to," Lila's voice called from the porch. "Mama, where do we sleep?" Malcolm looked at Clara. She exhaled slowly, then stepped past him and opened the station door wide. "Come on in," she said. "We'll make it ours." Later, after the children had curled into bed beneath borrowed quilts and the fire in the stove had settled to soft embers, Malcolm stood near the doorway, hat in hand. Clara crossed the room and reached for his hand. "You sure you want this?" she asked. He didn't answer with words, just drew her close, his forehead against hers, their breath shared in the quiet. "Then stay," she whispered. "I will." The first frost came early that year. By the third week of September, pale crystals clung to the porch railing each morning, and the grass turned brittle underfoot before sunup. Clara rose before the children each day, sweeping ash from the stove and kneading dough with her sleeves rolled to the elbow. The station house walls still let in the chill, but the routine brought steadiness. Familiarity. Malcolm had taken to repairing the fence line after breakfast, stretching wire and replacing bent nails with the quiet focus of a man used to working alone. Clara watched him through the window sometimes, the way he paused to study the land before each task, like he was listening to something only he could hear. One morning, as she poured water into the basin and set Lila's comb beside it, Clara turned to him where he leaned against the doorframe, arms dusted with cedar shavings. "You always work like that." He looked up. "Like what?" "Like the land speaking to you." He stepped inside, closing the door against the wind. "I pay attention, that's all." She wiped her hands on her apron. "To what?" "Where the ground sinks after rain, which boards swell first when it's cold." "What time the birds stop calling." Clara rested her hip against the table. "And what do you learn from all that?" He walked past her to the hearth and knelt to check the flame. "What to fix before it breaks." That night, after the children were asleep and the coals in the stove glowed low, Clara sat near the window, mending the hem of one of Levy's shirts. Malcolm sat across from her with his boots off, oiling the worn leather of his saddle bags. She didn't look up when she spoke. "I kept thinking when I was little that if I just made myself useful enough, no one would leave." Malcolm set the oilcloth aside. "Someone did anyway, my mother. She died slow. I was 12. After that, I learned how to make stew from scraps and patch trousers by lantern light." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You shouldn't have had to." She tightened her grip on the needle. "Maybe not, but I did. And I got good at it. Doesn't mean you have to stay good at surviving alone." She met his eyes. "And what if I forget how, being here with you?" He shook his head. "You won't, you'll just get better at something else." She folded the shirt and set it aside. "Like what?" "Living without fear." In the days that followed, small things changed. Malcolm taught Lila how to measure flour without spilling it, and Clara found Levy perched on his shoulders one morning, laughing as they hauled a bucket of well water between them. Clara didn't stop them. She leaned on the lintel and watched, arms crossed, letting the moment settle deep. One afternoon, Malcolm returned from town with a bundle wrapped in burlap and a slow smile tugging at his mouth. He set it on the table and unwrapped it without a word. Inside was a hand-forged griddle pan, flat and wide, the kind that could cook bread over open flame. Clara raised an eyebrow. "You trade something for this, couple of pelts." She ran a hand over the iron, warm from the sun. "I didn't ask for it, I know." She looked up at him, her voice quiet. "Why then?" His voice came without pause. "Because I want to." The next morning, she used it to make Johnny cakes, crisp at the edges, steam rising in the cold air. Malcolm poured coffee with a worn tin pot, and the children elbowed each other for the first bite. Later that week, a man from the post coach stopped by, asking if the station could take on more freight through October. Clara listened from the porch, arms folded as Malcolm nodded and said they'd manage. After the rider left, she stepped down to where he was coiling rope near the barn. "You didn't ask me first," she said. "I figured you'd say yes." "I might have said no." He looked at her, steady. "Would you have?" She let the silence stretch. "No," he nodded once. "Then I was right." That night, she didn't sit by the window. She stood near the stove, watching the firelight catch the edges of the room. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't been there that day?" she asked. He rubbed a hand over his jaw. "I don't let myself." "Why not?" "Because I was there." She stepped closer, her voice low. "You changed everything." He rose, slow. "So did you?" She reached for him then, her hand at the side of his neck, thumb brushing the edge of his jaw. "I don't need rescuing, I know. But I want a life that's mine, not one I'm always bracing against, so build it. I'm right here." The kiss wasn't uncertain this time. It was quiet and full, like the closing of a door against winter wind. When they pulled apart, she rested her forehead against his chest, his arms around her, the warmth between them stronger than the fire. "We'll make it work," she said. He pressed a kiss to her hair. "We already are." The first snow came down fine and quiet, dusting the earth in a hush that made even Levy walk softer. Clara watched from the station window as flurries collected along the fence posts and piled gently on the porch rail. Inside, the fire burned steady, and the scent of dried apples simmering in the pot filled the room. Malcolm stepped in from the barn, brushing snow from his shoulders. His cheeks were red with cold, his breath thick in the air as he peeled off his gloves. Clara handed him a cup of warm cider without a word. He took it, fingers grazing hers. "Fence'll hold through winter," he said. She nodded, folding a woven shawl over the back of the chair. "Good, the freight wagons'll be late come January, but they'll still come." "They will," he said. "And we'll be ready." The children were upstairs, tucked under quilts with novels borrowed from the schoolteacher who passed through with the mail each week. Clara had begun teaching Lila her letters in the evenings, and Levy could now add and subtract faster than she could count out biscuits. The stillness of the season gave them time to grow into themselves. Malcolm set his cup down. "You've made it a home." Clara turned toward him, her hands resting on the table. "No, we did." He stepped closer. "You ever think about what comes next?" "I try not to get ahead of the day." "Sometimes it's worth looking ahead." She studied him. "What are you thinking about?" He reached into his coat pocket and drew out a narrow leather pouch. From it he pulled a silver ring, plain and hand-worked, the band smooth and round. "I made it from the stirrup buckle off my first saddle," he said. "Wasn't using it anymore." Clara's breath caught, but she didn't move. "I know you didn't come here for this," he said, "but I came here for a life. And every part of it's better with you in it." She stepped forward, her eyes never leaving his. "I don't want a grand promise," she said. "I want steadiness. I want someone who shows up when the roof leaks and when the bread's burned." "I'll be here," he said, "always, not to fix you. Just to stand with you." She took the ring from his hand, turning it once between her fingers. Then she slipped it on. "You already do," she said. They were married under the cottonwood behind the station, where the land sloped gentle toward the creek. The preacher rode in from Townsend, and Clara wore a borrowed dress the color of wheat. Lila gathered dried grass and tied it with blue ribbon, and Levy handed Malcolm a twig broom to sweep the earth clean before the vows. The winter deepened, but the house grew warmer. Clara hung dried herbs from the rafters and lined the pantry shelves with jars of preserved fruit. Malcolm built a narrow shed beside the barn, fitted with tools passed down from the old station master. They worked side by side, mending what was broken and shaping each day to hold more than just survival. In spring, Clara sat on the porch with her hands resting gently at her belly, watching as Lila braided flowers into Levy's hair, both of them barefoot in the new grass. Malcolm leaned against the rail beside her, his hand covering hers. "You think it'll be a boy or a girl?" he asked. "I think it'll be loved," she said. He kissed her temple, his voice low. "Always." Travelers still stopped by the station, boots muddy, voices rough from trail dust. They stayed a night, sometimes two, and left with bellies full and horses fed. Word spread that the station east of Townsend was well kept, the kind of place where the coffee stayed hot and the folks running it asked your name like it mattered. Years passed. The children grew tall, their backs straight and their hands calloused from work that made them proud. Clara taught numbers and letters to neighbor children in the front room during the slow season. Malcolm carved a cradle from pine, the same wood he'd used to build their kitchen table. And every night, when the lamps were turned low and the house lay quiet, Clara would reach for Malcolm's hand beneath the quilts, and he would lace their fingers together like it was the most natural thing in the world. Because it was. Their life wasn't grand, but it was whole. Built from smoke and soil, from quiet mornings and steady hands. And in all the wide, open land of Montana, there was no place either of them would rather be than at the hearth they'd made with one another.